I'm not here to judge Doug Wilson, a pastor in Moscow, Idaho. I will not even attempt to comment on the various positions he has espoused in his books and on his podcasts. Perhaps you've never heard of him. I hadn't until a few days ago. It turns out he's written a lot of books, but where we live, it's rare for me to enter a bookstore and rarer still to enter a Christian bookstore. It wasn't Doug Wilson's books, but his long interview with CNN that projected him to a much wider audience. Well, to one more person at least, me, and that was by way of a short article in Church Leaders. Do I count as a much wider audience? The CNN interview was triggered by Wilson's connection with Washington, D.C., and a church there that holds views similar to his. The fact that Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth joined that church further served to propel Wilson and his ideas into the national spotlight. If you're not familiar with this man and his books, just enter his name on Google and you'll find links to the many books he's written and to articles and videos by others who have come out in opposition to his views. The controversies center around his views on topics such as masculinity, the place of women in the home and society, slavery, and immigration. I'm going to skip those issues, which you can look at yourself. I'm going to concentrate on a biblical position regarding his label as a Christian nationalist, and more specifically on what he believes about the second coming of Christ. Now, there's nothing in the Bible that addresses Christian nationalism directly, but it appears to me that Doug Wilson's Christian nationalism is a product of his understanding of the end time, and I will cite passages that, to me, clearly contradict his position. Bear with me. I will try to keep it simple. In my head, I just heard my wife say, well, that would be a first. Now, first of all, basically, I see postmillennialism as the foundational error of Doug Wilson's teaching. I think I just heard a female voice in my head saying, I knew you couldn't keep it simple. You jumped right into the deep end. Well, it is simple, really. Millennialism is the belief based on Revelation 20, verses 1 through 7, that says that when Jesus comes, he will reign for 1,000 years, along with his resurrected faithful followers, verses 4 and 6. And Satan will be bound for those 1,000 years, verse 2, before he is released and sets up the final battle against Christ, verses 7 and 8. Then comes the final judgment day, and the eternal kingdom will be set up. Premillennialists believe that Jesus will come before that 1,000-year period, the millennium. He will raise his followers from the dead, and they will reign with him for 1,000 years. This group is further divided into pre-tribulation, mid-tribulation, and post-tribulation rapture advocates. They disagree on just when the Lord will come in relation to the great tribulation prophesied before the millennium. But they are all pre-millennialists. There are post-millennialists. They believe Jesus will come at the end of the 1,000 years, after his church has prepared the earth for his return. Then he will take possession of the final eternal kingdom. The church has 1,000 years to facilitate the Lord's return. That's Doug Wilson's position. Then there are Amillennialists, those who don't believe there will be a literal 1,000-year millennial period at all. I think they have to spiritualize so much of the Bible that I'm not even sure what they believe about Jesus' return, or if they believe he will return at all. I confess I haven't studied the details of their doctrine, but I have the impression they concentrate on serving God today and don't concern themselves with the prophecies of the Lord's return in the future. They would say, that's up to God, so we'll just live today in a way that pleases him. There's an element of wisdom in that, I must say. The first problem I see with Doug Wilson's post-millennial position is that he believes in a literal millennium during which time the nations will be discipled, a time of kingdom expansion that will culminate in Jesus' return. How do we know when that millennium begins? Has it begun? Apparently it didn't begin with the apostles, maybe the Reformation, or the founding of America, Wilson's church in Moscow, Idaho, the rise to power of the current Republican administration. If we know when the millennium starts, we can pinpoint Christ's coming 1,000 years later, give or take a decade or two. He believes the gospel will be victorious in the world, and the nations will be discipled before Jesus comes. With a world population of 8 billion, he admits there's a lot of work to do, but the churches are doing that. He believes the world will eventually be converted to Christianity, forming a Christian theocracy that will facilitate the second coming. The first step, of course, is to transform America into a Christian theocracy, which he, his church, and others like him are working to achieve. At one point in the interview, he admitted it would probably take another 250 years to turn America into a Christian nation. But Doug Wilson's view of conquering the world for Christ in modern times goes back to the 1700s at least. When William Carey left England as a missionary to India in 1793, his example set off a wave of missionary work in the 1800s and earned him the title, the father of modern missions. Missionary societies were formed as China, Africa, and South America attracted an influx of missionaries. This period is reflected in hymns still found in church hymnals. In a brief perusal of the Baptist hymnals section entitled Evangelism and Missions, one finds the hymn entitled, "We've a Story to Tell to the Nations," and its refrain says, "For the darkness shall turn to dawning, and the dawning to noonday bright, and Christ's great kingdom shall come on earth, the kingdom of love and light." Many other songs like it were written in the 1800s. "O Zion, haste," appeals to the church to, quote, "make haste and fulfill her mission to tell the world, the many thousands still lying bound in the darksome prison house of sin, and proclaim the gospel to every people, tongue, and nation." For this work, Christians are told in the hymn, "Give of your sons to bear the message glorious, give of thy wealth to speed them on their way." There are too many other hymns to list here, but "Send the Light" and "Set My Soul Afire" are examples. Even before Carey's pioneer mission endeavor to India in 1793, Isaac Watts, who died in 1748, wrote the words to "Jesus shall reign over all the peoples in a glorious kingdom." These thoughts are echoed in his more well-known and beloved "Joy to the World, the Lord is Come." Although it's practically sung only at Christmas, it's not about Jesus' birth at all. It's about the glory of his second coming to rule over all nature and mankind, when thorns will no longer infest the ground. We were missionaries overseas ourselves for nearly 45 years. But is the overall missionary endeavor today the same as it was in the 1800s, when European colonial powers ruled most of Africa or South Asia? Back then, conquering the world for Jesus dovetailed with the political realities in the colonies of darkest Africa. Getting into the independent nations of today as a missionary can be very complicated, if not impossible. The increasing difficulty of access to the unreached areas of the world, it's compounded by the explosive growth of the world population. The missionary vision of the 1800s, by which the church would bring in the kingdom of love and peace, was dealt a death blow by the War to End All Wars in 1914. Far from ending all wars, the Great War gave way to an even greater war in 1938. While World War II may have ended, wars have not. If Doug Wilson thinks it may take 250 years to turn America into a Christian nation, how long does he think it will take to turn the world's nations into Christian theocracies to facilitate the coming of the Christ's eternal kingdom? Methinks not even a millennium would suffice. What the Bible says is really more important than what I think. In Matthew 24, Jesus spoke at length about his coming and the signs of the end of the age. In answer to his disciples' questions in verse 11, he did say there would be plenty of spirituality. There will be many prophets in the last days, but there will be false prophets. Here is how he describes world conditions at the end. They will hand you, speaking about his followers, over for persecution. They will kill you. You will be hated by all nations because of my name. Then many will take offense, betray one another, and hate one another. Many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. From those short verses, I would say that the projected discipleship of the nations failed to produce love and peace. In fact, in verse 12, Jesus says lawlessness will multiply and cause many to grow even colder in their love. Is this the worldwide Christian theocracy the church is charged with implementing so Christ can come? Perhaps this view results from a misunderstanding of Jesus' words in verse 14. This good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. This is the only verse I can think of that would encourage someone to think there will be a worldwide turning to Jesus. But let's look at this statement in more detail. In all the world, the word means the inhabited portion of the earth. Nations is the Greek word ethne, which refers to peoples, races, ethnicities. Generally, today we think of nations as countries, like the United Nations, geopolitical entities with borders that may often shift. So Jesus says the gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the inhabited portions of the earth, and modern technology of radio, TV, and the internet by satellite makes it possible to reach places that would be inaccessible by historic missionary methods. With migration today facilitated by modern means of travel, the gospel is being proclaimed to nearly every nation, ethnicity. The nations come to where we are, without our having to go to other countries. On Madeira Island, we held Sunday services in English, Portuguese, and Russian, and ministered to citizens of nearly 20 countries during our 40 years there. In the Great Commission in Matthew 28, verses 18 and following, Jesus told his disciples to make disciples of all nations, and baptize and teach them to obey all he has taught them. I like the International Standard Version that reads, "Therefore, as you go, disciple people in all nations, baptizing them." People. Nations means ethnicities, not countries. Disciples are individual persons. We baptize individuals, not cities and countries. I thought of the French phrase tout le monde, which literally means all the world, but simply means everyone, the individuals. I suggest a better translation of Jesus' words would be, make disciples from all the peoples wherever you go. Jesus said, this good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all peoples before the end comes. He didn't say all the nations will be discipled and all the peoples would accept the gospel of the kingdom. We're called to proclaim the gospel of the kingdom to all nations. We're not told to convert all the nations from all their false religions. Doug Wilson's post-millennial view doesn't fit my understanding of these verses. I read Matthew 24, verse 22 that says, unless the days of the tribulation, were limited, no one would survive. But those days will be limited because of the elect. Verse 29 and following say, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. Then all the peoples of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Verses 37 to 39, as the days of Noah were, so the coming of the Son of Man will be. For in those days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day Noah boarded the ark. They didn't know until the flood came and swept them all away. So this is the way the coming of the Son of Man will be. If you look into Doug Wilson's books and YouTube postings, you'll find a lot of other issues you may or may not agree with, ones that generate a lot of controversy. I have my own positions on them too, but I limit myself here to his advocacy of American Christian nationalism, which is based on a flawed doctrinal position. I'm flexible on many points of prophecy. The text of the Bible is the only infallible word about prophecy, which is the same for all of us. But none of us has the infallible interpretation of details regarding the second coming. While I firmly hold to my views, I am lenient toward the differing views of others on many prophetic passages. I am flexible, but I can only bend so far doctrinally. Postmillennialism is a bridge too far. The verses in my Bible won't stretch that far.